Morning. So here we are on January 27th. It's a Friday. A little bit of snow, a little dusting, if you will. And we are in the Psalm 18. So we have the cats in the background once again, like always. And they're a little rambunctious this morning, so they may make some noise. But we will jump in verse 7 today of Psalm 18. So it says this. It says, "The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook, and they trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet, and he mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. And out of the brightness of his presence clouds advanced. With hailstones and bolts of lightning the Lord thundered from heaven, and the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare. At your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils, he reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of the deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemies and from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." And so, quite the verse this morning. Now, in this passage, David, remember yesterday that this psalm, this is a psalm of victory. David, he sang this psalm at the end of Samuel 22, 2 Samuel 22, and it's a psalm of victory. And in the passage, in this part of the passage, David is describing the overwhelming power that is at the disposal of God, that he employs to protect us. He describes how the earth reacts when God responds to our cry, or to his cry. Now, what's interesting about this passage, that if you actually look through the life of David in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, God never actually literally rescues him in this manner. Now, there have been times in the history of the people where God, through natural means, through the natural elements, through storms and through natural plagues, there have been times where God has actually used the creation to save his people. Even, for example, in Joshua, where the sun stands still. And so what's David doing here? On one hand, you could say that he's just using metaphor. He's using, there's the cats, they're out of control. In one way, you could say that David's just using metaphor and language. I'm sorry, guys. Let me grab that thing from the cat real fast. That would have never stopped. I'm sorry. So on one hand, we could say David's just using metaphor here. But I think there perhaps could be something else going on as well. When David sings, and I've observed in my life when I sing, there are special moments where God speaks to us. And sometimes God will reveal things to us in the sense of worship, in the sense of those types of places. Notice what he says in verse 6 and 7, which was a part of the reading yesterday. It says that in my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help, and from his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. And the earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. Now, what's terribly interesting about this is that on the cross, when Jesus cried out to God, it says that the earth shook, that there was an earthquake, the rocks split. In Matthew 27, it says like this. It says, when Jesus cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks split. And I wonder maybe that in the times of David's crying out in distress, if perhaps he was given a picture of God's true victory on the cross. And I don't know whether that's the case or not. But David simply just describes a scene of his own, and he observes it as his own personal victory, but perhaps he's describing the victory that we all are taking part in. See, on the cross we receive from God the true victory. On the cross, our relationship with God is restored, and on the cross our battle has been won. And so I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if God gave David a picture of the true victory, and you and I holding on to that true victory. See, here's the thing with the cross, is in our lives oftentimes we live from a posture where we're fighting with the hopes of a victory. But the reality of the Christian life is that we fight from a place of victory, because the victory has already been won. The battle has already been won. And when we can get that right, when we can get that in our hearts, it fundamentally changes the way that we live. It changes the way that we interact with our families, our spouses. For example, me and Amber got in a little bit of an argument this morning, but I took Annabelle to school. She came back, and we very quickly forgave each other. Now, 15 years ago, we would not have forgiven one another that easily. We would have fought one another for the victory of the fight, of the argument. But as we have allowed the gospel to transform our lives, we've discovered that we don't have to fight for these little personal victories. We already live from that space, and we can forgive one another, and we can be free. The same is true for people perhaps that are caught up in addictions, that are perhaps caught up in the rat race of trying to get ahead. It's learning that we're already been approved of. It's learning that we've already been set free. It's learning that we just have to learn how to live from that place. Learning how to live from the victory, not fighting simply for one. So, what does that look like for you? In what ways, perhaps, do you need to claim God's victory over your life? The way that you begin to do that, simply thanking Him for the victory, entering into relationship with Him because of what He's done on the cross, and then living free from that place, living from His victory. So, I don't know, that's what I kind of got from the passage this morning, and hopefully it's good news to you. So, continue to read this passage. There's still several verses to go. We will not be doing this devotion on Saturday and Sunday, and we will pick back up Monday morning. So love you guys. Blessings. Have a great day. Bye.